En nuestro capítulo especial de hoy, Thales Teixeira, experto global en desconexión de clientes y modelos de negocios centrados en el consumidor, cofundador de la consultora Decoupling.co, fue profesor en la Escuela de Negocios de Harvard durante 10 años, donde enseñó marketing digital y e-commerce. Es autor del libro Unlocking the Customer Value Chain, donde explora cómo las empresas disruptivas capturan clientes al enfocarse en puntos clave de la cadena de valor. Su investigación ha sido destacada en medios como The New York Times, Financial Times y Forbes. Además, ha asesorado a ejecutivos de más de 15 empresas, Fortune 100, y fue juez de CNBC's Disruptor 50, reconociendo a las startups más innovadoras. Para Teixeira, la verdadera disrupción no nace de la tecnología, sino de entender los momentos críticos donde los clientes deciden abandonar una marca y diseñar nuevas experiencias en modelos de negocio que los atrae y fideliza.
Hola, les habla Mauricio Duarte, director de SEO CX. Este canal fue creado para los profesionales, para los empresarios y para los emprendedores que están convencidos que el éxito pasa a través del deleite de sus clientes. Acá hemos convocado a líderes de todos los sectores para que nos inspiren a través de sus historias y sus vivencias sobre qué funciona y qué no funciona en estos temas de clientecentricidad. Para nosotros es muy importante que ustedes se suscriban a nuestro canal. Por favor, hazlo pronto. Gracias.
Well, it's a pleasure being here with Thales Teixeira from Brazil. He's an expert in customer value, creating value, AI, so many things. It would take a whole podcast just describing the knowledge and the capacities of our guest today. Great to have you here, Thales.
Thank you, Mauricio. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so obviously our conversation will go around CX, client centricity, how to create value in organizations, innovation, AI, different topics that I would like to cover with you today. Nevertheless, for me, it's very important always to start with the person behind the story. So tell us a little bit about your background. I know you were born in Brazil. How do you came about becoming a professor in Harvard and now in University of California? I know there's a long story. Please illustrate our audience from your background, please.
Absolutely. I'll try to keep it short. I was raised in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. From there, I went to a business school in São Paulo. And when I was an undergraduate, I was sure I was going to become a company executive, a big company executive.
Okay.
I was absolutely sure that I was not going to do a graduate degree, a master's degree. But when I graduated from business, I ended up going to do a master's degree in statistics.
Wow.
At the University of São Paulo, both of them, because I realized that that would be a way to get competitive differentiation. Statistics was becoming more important in business, and very few people knew about it. But as I was doing my master's advisor said, you should really go for a PhD. And I said, I'm never going to go for a PhD. I'm going to go to work for a company. And guess what? I graduated from statistics, and then I applied for a bunch of PhDs in the United States, and I got accepted to a few, and I chose the University of Michigan to do my PhD.
Okay.
And the reason I chose to do that is also because I wanted to differentiate myself, and I said, I'm going to get a PhD, and then I'm going to come back to Brazil and be a consultant. And I will be very, very unique because very few consultants in Brazil have PhDs from American top schools. Okay, but now PhD in the US is 4 to 5 years. And in the process of doing a PhD, I started doing research in advertising. And as I was doing research, I told my advisor, I want to finish, go back to Brazil, become a consultant. And my advisor said, that's fine. And as we got closer and closer, my advisor said, maybe you should apply to become a professor in a few universities in the US. just by chance. I said, okay, but I don't want to be a professor. I don't want to be an academic. I graduated with my PhD. I applied to many schools. I got accepted by quite a few schools, University of Southern California, Georgia Tech, and a few other ones. But then I fell in love with Harvard Business School. They gave me an option, and then something that I said I would never become an academic. I eventually became an assistant professor at Harvard Business School. I was there for 5 years, and then I got promoted to associate professor. And that was 10 years of my life at the Harvard Business School. The first 5 years, I did research on this area that I created that I call the economics of attention, that really tried to understand how to help companies effectively optimize the allocation of money to building great brands. And then the last 5 years was really working on understanding how these startups that initially didn't have much money or resources or technologies, they came to grow and disrupt big established businesses. So this process of digital disruption is which I fell in love with in the last 5 years. So my life is summarized in a bunch of sayings that I was consistently saying, I'm not going to do this, and I eventually do it.
Okay, and now you're in California, I understand?
Yes, so a little bit before the pandemic, my wife and I decided that we wanted to leave Boston. We were tired of like the cold and the snow for many months. And we after being at Harvard for 10 years, I said, you know, I need to do something different. And studying innovation, I wanted to be closer and closer to kind of the epicenter of innovation. So moving to California, being in warmer weather, being close to the ocean, these were all kind of desires in my life. And I finally got, after many years, I finally created the circumstances to be able to come here. Now I'm a professor at the University of California. I have a company, an advisory and consulting company called decoupling.co, and I work with big companies and startups in all matters of digital disruption and transformation.
Well, that's incredible. What a great story, and it gives a perfect background for the topic that we are here today to talk about. Let's start with the beginning. I know you wrote this bestseller, Unlocking the Customer Value Chain. What came about? What were your thoughts at the moment that brought you to write a book about this topic?
Sure. So I you know, at Harvard Business School, what we do is we write cases on companies, and I started writing cases on companies. The first startup that I ever visited was a startup that was growing really fast. It was founded by a Harvard student that didn't finish his course, not Bill Gates, didn't finish his course and decided to go and open up a startup, and he started growing. And then they invited me to give a talk there. And this startup was the only company in the world that I've entered. And before entering the building, there were a lot of people taking pictures right in front of the sign of this company. This company is called Facebook, and it was before it IPO'd and became public. And so I gave a talk on the economics of attention that they were very interested in. And then I asked them a bunch of questions. I actually saw Mark Zuckerberg. He's programming, standing up in his computer in sandals. And I started talking to the executives and say, how are you planning to disrupt the social media space? Because there are other social media companies. And they explained to me, and I wrote it down. And then I was invited to give a talk to Netflix, and I gave a talk. And then I asked them, how are you planning to disrupt the movie industry? And then they explained to me, and I wrote it down. And I visited Airbnb and a variety of other companies, many of which I wrote Harvard case studies on. And as I was asking this question, I realized that they were telling me very similar things. And the stories of disruption were never, we're going to develop this technology, and it's going to be proprietary, and it's going to be disruptive. And with this technology, we're going to build a phenomenal business, and we're going to steal market share from all the established companies. They never said that. They always talked about customers or consumers, how they were unsatisfied with certain activities, and they were starting to address these activities in a very narrow fashion, using a different business model than the established companies were doing, and then where they're going to be very customer-centric and deliver whatever it is that the customer wanted, whether they could make money or not. And I listened in various industries, and as I listened, I started seeing a common approach to digital disruption. And then when I got this common approach, I said, I'm going to test it. I'm going to give this a common approach to my students at Harvard. And so in teaching, I would explain to them, and they started more and more coming to my course and taking my course, and they started seeing a different way to build a business. That was not one that requires you to build a disruptive proprietary technology. It was much more focused on understanding where customers are unsatisfied, trying to identify why they're unsatisfied, and deliver a narrow product or service for that customer instead of delivering everything that a customer wanted, just something better than what they were used to for that specific activity that caused them lack of satisfaction. And so I started doing that, and in the process, writing cases, documenting. And the more I researched and visited companies, the more I saw this common approach. And that led me to eventually write a book about it, describing this process of designing customer-centric startups.
Wow, great. So I've read your book, and I love it.
Thank you.
There's a concept you start by. I think one of the main arguments is disruption is not about technology. Disruption is understanding in the different links of the value chain for customers where there's areas that you can really improve and make a business case out of it.
Yeah.
Is that a correct understanding?
That's right. That's right. My former colleague, Michael Porter, very famous for coming out with the idea, the concept of the value chain. But the value chain from his point of view is what activities companies do to create value for themselves. So there is marketing, there's inbound logistics, outbound logistics, there's R&D, and there's a lot of activities that companies build to create value for themselves. I thought, well, being very marketing driven and customer centric, what if there's a concept like that from the point of view of the customer? And so I created the idea of the customer value chain. To give an example, let's say that I'm going to go to Colombia and I need to reserve a hotel. I need to first figure out where I'm going to stay. What are the options of hotels? I need to look at a list of hotels. I go on one, click the website, look at the dates, choose what room I want to reserve, and then I put the payment, my information, and then I book it. Then when I travel, I need to go there, check in, and then I spend my time in the hotel, in the pool, in the lobby. I use a bunch of services, then I check out, and I pay, check out, and leave. These are all activities in my value chain as the customer of the hotel. That's why I created the concept of the customer value chain. The second point is, when you map out all these activities, only a few activities are creating value for the customer. I having a reservation creates value for me because I have a peace of mind that when I get there, there'll be a room for me. Using the room, using a clean room, using the restaurant, that creates value for me. What does not create value for me is having to look at the options of the hotels, of the rooms, having to put my credit card information, having to check in, having to check out. All these things are activities that I have to do, but erode value for me. That's what I call value eroding activities. It's a necessary evil. And then the last activity is paying, either paying to book or paying when I check out. This is a value capturing activity that the hotel captures value for me. So whatever activity that customers do, either individuals or companies, they can be classified into value creating, value eroding, value capturing activity. And that's super important to understand. How are you going to disrupt? For example, if you want to create a business to disrupt the hotel industry, you need to understand where is value created and where is value eroded from me as a customer to build a customer-centric business model that is trying to disrupt any industry.
Thank you so much for the explanation. You mentioned Michael Porter at the beginning. One might argue that today Porter's approach might be complicated given the fact that there's participants in different industries that come from abroad, come from technology, come from different sectors. So try to map a competitive advantage within thousands of competitors. It's going to be very hard. So what are your thoughts about that?
That's a very important point. So I think we have to keep everybody in its place. Michael Porter came out with the Porter's five forces in 1985. That was an amazingly valuable tool for the time. And the way companies were structured is you had big companies in certain industries and you had very few competitors. When I was a little kid, I go to the supermarket, there was Pepsi, there was Coke, there's a few other brands that were much smaller, but there was a battle between Pepsi and Coke. There's still a battle between Airbus and Boeing for airlines, airplanes. And in many other industries, there are a few big players. And so competitive strategy in the Michael Porter fashion was very much about understanding where are your competitive advantages, where are your competitive disadvantages relative to an opposing player. So, Pepsi would do it versus Coke, Coke would do it versus Pepsi. But what happens today when you go to the supermarket? There's 50 different brands of soda. And if you broaden the scope, there's 100 brands of teas and juices and other things to drink. Now, if you ask somebody, if the boss says, hey, why don't you do a Porter's five forces on the 150 competitors that we have in the supermarket? And it's impossible. It's going to be a nightmare. So you can't do it. And I would argue it doesn't matter that much anymore because companies shouldn't focus on the few players that they're playing chess games with anymore. What companies need to focus on the customer, understand how are customers making decisions, what are customers getting or not getting, and how can we deliver value to the customer. You can pretty much forget about these 1,500 brands. You shouldn't evaluate there. Actually, if you do it, it might take you into just the common thing that they're doing, and you might realize something that is much more profound. That is, people want, health. They don't want to drink these things anymore. And so you might want to say people want convenience, and then you come up with something like SodaStream or something that was Nespresso, that they didn't want things in cans that are bulky, take it home, have to go to the supermarket, throw away the can, a lot of this. They just want to make their own drink at home. And so SodaStream completely disrupted the industry, not by looking at all of the other cans of beverages, but saying, hey, how about we give people carbonated water in a bunch of different syrups, and then they can make their own soda at home. Huge disruption, completely bypassed all of the other players in the market.
Wow. Okay, great. What is the concept of decoupling? I know there was a bundle, there's decoupling. Can you elaborate a little bit on the theory behind decoupling?
Sure. Yeah. So when you think about the customer value chain, if you think about a bank does many things for us. You go for a bank to get a checking account, a savings account, a loan, deposit your salary, getting a mortgage, in a credit card, debit card, a bunch of things, right? And each one of these things can be part of a customer value chain. As I get my salary from the University of California, I deposit, I use a bunch of banking services, and I pay in all of these things, right? What I started observing that these startups were doing is, because they can't, in the beginning, they can't replicate what a bank does, or Amazon in the beginning couldn't replicate all of the products that Walmart sold, or in the beginning, Uber couldn't replicate all the needs of transportation for customers. They started thinking about how can we enter a market very quickly and deliver one sliver of value in the customer value chain, instead of trying to deliver everything. So in fintechs, each company started looking at something. The first few fintechs, PayPal, they said, well, let's allow you to easily go online and send money online to somebody else. Online account to online account. More recently, Nubank which is one of the biggest digital banks in the world, in Brazil, and the founder is Colombian, as far as I recall, one of the co-founders. They realized that banks were taking too long to give you a credit card. So the bank is like, we're going to take 2 to 3 days to process whether we're going to give you, because we need to evaluate. You need to send the documents, evaluate, and then take 3 days later. And then we have to ship you a credit card 2 more days, a week. The new bank said, upload your documents online, and we will tell you whether you're going to get a credit card in with a matter of maybe 30 seconds or a minute. And we'll give you the number, a digital number for you to use in your online purchases immediately. So instead of Nubank saying we're going to become a bank and we're going to have checking accounts, savings, credit cards, debit, all of these things, Nubank decided to steal one little activity from established banks, which is giving you a credit card. And that is called decoupling. They looked at the customer value chain, identify where customers were unhappy, and they stole that activity from banks. And so the first customers of banks, they didn't say, okay, I'm going to cancel all my bank accounts and I'm going to go with Nubank. No, they kept their bank accounts and they applied for a Nubank credit card. And they got it immediately. And they're like, wow, this is magical. It just took me, 5 minutes and now I can use this new credit card. And they started using the credit card. That was decoupling. But afterwards, because they were so happy with Nubank, when Nubank launched a second product, maybe a digital banking account, then these customers say, oh, let me get that too. That's super easy, very convenient, low to no fees. And then they started increasing their business with Nubank and decreasing their business with the established banks. They would not use their checking account anymore, not using their savings, not using this, not using that. Some of them would eventually cancel. And that is how decoupling works. You enter through a sliver in the customer value chain, and then you start growing by capturing more adjacent activities.
Okay, so our audience might be composed of 2 different participants. One from incumbents, and following your example, if I was in a bank in Latin America and I was listening right now, I would be very worried. How do I defend from somebody decoupling some of my links and disrupting my business? And the other group of participants might be the entrepreneurs that you probably explained a little bit more. Could you provide some advice for incumbents and for newcomers?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, my book, the first part of the book is of unlocking the customer value chain, is all about how disruption works, and it's geared towards the entrepreneur, your second audience, but it's also geared towards the executive of big established companies to understand how the process of disruption works. Because if you think of the process of disruption that is attacking companies, you need to understand this attacking machine before you can defend yourself from it. And that's why the back end of my book is explaining how do you defend from decoupling. I wanted the executives to learn how disruption works so they can understand how to defend themselves. And so it's very important that you ask me the question first, and now we'll go into the second part. Okay, given this process works, how do you defend from it? Well, first you realize, like I said, that the entrepreneur is trying to look for weaknesses in the established company where customers are unsatisfied. So you need to look, the game has become of looking at the customer value chain, what your company offers to customers, and for each activity, where your customers are satisfied and unsatisfied. Because where they are unsatisfied, if they're consistently unsatisfied in huge amount of customers for a long time, that is where you're leaving opportunity for an entrepreneur to come in. That's what we call weak link. We need to really identify the weak links of the business, which are by definition the activities that an established company does on behalf of consumers, in which consumers are consistently unsatisfied. Identify that, and you need to plug in that hole. Because even if you think that's small, like, oh, our bank does a bunch of things. Yeah, so what if our bank, takes 3 or 4 days to give a credit card. You know, there's always a reason why, right? We don't want to give credit cards to anybody. What about if they don't pay? What about if they don't have ability to pay? So there's always a reason why big companies say, well, you know, our customers are unsatisfied there. But if you leave that lack of satisfaction, that unhappiness with customers, you're feeding new entrepreneurs. And the way to avoid fighting with big, nobody wants to fight. If you ask me, you know, how do you fight new bank as established company, bank? I'm like, oh, you're toast, right? But you need to make sure the beast doesn't grow to a position that now is huge. And the way to do that is not feed the beast. And feeding the beast means leaving opportunities for what you do, your company does as a service or products that allow customers to be very unsatisfied. You need to figure out that, and you need to solve that problem. And in the case here that we're talking about is making sure, saying, you know, we need to reduce the time for consumers to get a credit card. How is it possible that new bank was able to do it? Any established bank could have done this and avoided creating these new banks, but they ended up not doing. So identify weak link, measure. You need to figure out a way. In what I do for my companies is I measure in the NPS scale, Net Promoter Score, not for a brand, because that doesn't help you. NPS by each activity in the customer value chain. So you have a curve of high points where customers are satisfied, called strong links, and weak links. Identify the weak links and then plug it in. Use innovation and improvement to make sure that that satisfaction goes up.
Okay. I was about to ask you the correlation with NPS, and you just explained. So basically, you will look into the transactional NPS in the customer journey to detect which ones are low and try to see how you can elaborate and create more benefits and increase the NPS on that specific episode so you can protect yourself. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And just to give just a few more examples in other industries, we do research to collect NPS. You talked about transactional NPS. We talked about decomposed NPS because we decompose it by the customer value chain, but it's kind of the same argument. We did it for the auto industry in South America. The activity where customers are most unhappy is when they want to buy a new car and they want to trade in their used car, and the dealer evaluates their used car at a very low price. They feel robbed. So used car evaluation is the weak link in the process of buying new cars in South America. Another one in the healthcare sector, there's a variety of weak links. People submitting documentation to get health insurance, people having to wait for the period in which they can use their health insurance, people getting reimbursed, kind of these things. In big cities in South America, when you look at hospitals, we have the NPS of many hospitals and we decomposed. What is the worst thing in hospitals that most people complain about? Parking. Parking, out of all of the services, they actually are okay with a doctor. Parking is where they're most upset in big cities in South America. So we started seeing the weak links, and we started seeing startups and say, okay, how does a hospital solve the parking problem? Well, you know, if you offered like Uber services or something like that, that could solve a problem, right? There's other startups that are coming out with the idea of having you be able to do lab tests at home by ordering kits and then submitting it through the mail to labs, instead of going and having to go into the lab, spending time, going and parking, and all these things. So there are solutions to all these things, but the startups are looking at the weak links in the industries.
Okay, thank you so much. Thales, regarding, I know that your recent work has to do a lot with AI.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on how do you envision AI changing the status of innovation as we speak?
Yeah. So, you know, I talked about customer value chain. I talked about finding the weak link, and you finding the weak link by understanding where customers are unsatisfied. And how do you traditionally do it as an executive? Well, you ask for surveys. You survey current customers, you survey prior customers, and you ask them about a variety of activities. But if you start asking your customers too many things about too many questions, you're not going to get good quality responses. You're going to start having challenges of they're not wanting to fill out the surveys. By the way, all companies are surveying their customers. So I feel that companies have overused surveys, and we consumers are tired of answering these surveys. Particularly if there's more than 2 or 3 questions, nobody wants to answer these surveys anymore. So now we have a problem because Professor Teixeira here is telling you, hey, you need to understand where your customers are unhappy, but I need to do a bunch of surveys, and nobody wants to answer these surveys anymore to tell me these things. So how do I reconcile the two? I need to know where customers are unhappy, and I need to know in many things that I do. That's where we started looking into AI, because when our clients would come up to us and help us ask, can you help us identify the weak links? We would have to do surveys. And we have all these problems that as any other survey company did. So we started going and looking that if we go online, for many industries, consumers go online and they talk about their experiences. In social media, in review websites, you can see a bunch of reviews on different companies. And in those reviews, you can start to see where customers are most unhappy with each product or service or activity that they're doing. And so we started looking at, ever since ChatGPT came out, and then Google Gemini, many other LLMs, we started creating our own Gen AI tool, which is essentially getting a general purpose Gen AI tool and improving it for our purpose to go online, read a bunch of online reviews of consumers of a specific brand, and then mapping out the customer value chain and telling us where customers are most unhappy and where they are most happy. So we started replacing online surveys with our Gen AI tool using online reviews to identify NPS scores for each activity in the customer value chain. And now I'm proud to say that we can do a much better job. We have much more data. It's much faster, real-time, accurate to identify precisely where customers are unhappy for our clients. But when we were able to do it for our clients, we said, well, why don't we do it for your competitors? And then we were able to use the same tool to recreate, for example, for Nubank, all of the satisfaction scores for Nubank and for all of the other Latin America banks that are competing with Nubank, so we can understand relatively and show our clients where they have weak links, but where their competitors also have weak links, so they can benchmark this.
Okay. Without getting very technical, just because our audience might be thinking right now,
yeah,
if I understand you correctly, the AI will collect the verbatims in social media and grade from 0 to 10 to establish an NPS score. So the AI will do 2 things. Will read and understand whatever they're saying, and they, based on training, will grade it. Is that correct?
Yes, but the AI will need to first figure out what brand is it being talked about. Oh, this brand it's talking about Toyota. Oh, this is an auto. It's a purchaser of a car, a Toyota brand, and it's reading. It'll say, what activities is this reviewer talking about? Oh, they're talking about when they visited the dealer, when they negotiated, when they made the purchase, and when they did the first maintenance. Oh, okay. And then that score on a 0 to 10 scale, it evaluates the 0 to 10 for all these activities that the customer is talking about. For example, the customer said, well, you know, the dealer was super nice. I love the dealer, the salesperson. They showed me all these cars. They were patient, all these things. And then the AI will kind of, based on its training, will say, oh, this is a 9 on an NPS scale. And then, but the negotiation was really bad. They undervalued my car. All this, okay, NPS 3. And then we'll give NPS for each activity that reviewer talked about. And we'll do that hundreds of thousands of times until it stabilizes the collection of the data.
Okay, so now I get it. Basically, the AI will determine if it's a value-creating activity or an eroding activity and will grade it accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. For each brand.
Okay, great. The other thing that might be very important for our audience, Thales, is obviously much of them are here in Latin America. And in our countries, there's a lot of entrepreneurship. Governments, local and national, are promoting people to start their own businesses. And my thoughts are that sometimes it's biased, as you mentioned initially, to technology, that you have to have the patent or the algorithm, have a whole grip on the technology, and that will give you the competitive advantage. I know it's not based on your response, but could you provide some advice for thousands of entrepreneurs that are out there hearing this and watching this conversation? What are the best advices based on what your observations worldwide in tech companies in California? I know that you recently were invited into Asia. What can you advise to the Latin community?
Sure. I think that, and in my book, I talk about digital startups versus tech startups. First, as you mentioned, the big theme of my book is that technology doesn't disrupt markets. It's customers who disrupt markets. So wherever you find an opportunity, when you see customers that are unsatisfied, there's an opportunity for a new business. You should think that. So if you're unsatisfied, or your friends are unsatisfied, or a bunch of people that are unsatisfied, there's an opportunity there. You can build a company that can become a tech company, but it doesn't need to have proprietary, novel technology. You can have very basic technology that is available to everybody. A few examples, right? Netflix. Netflix started by sending DVDs by mail. What technology do you need to do that? You and I could have done this. You need a warehouse, and you need to start buying DVDs cheap and then sending it by mail to people. The website was something very simple to say, here are our movies. Which ones do you want? They become a multi-billion-dollar business. Of course, eventually they disrupt themselves from moving into streaming, but before they didn't need any technologies. Same thing with Airbnb. No new technology. It was kind of very basic website. Right? So you should think about the customer opportunity and less about the technology, because customers disrupt markets. Once you understand that, you can see, and I've written many cases, you can see in my book, there are obviously technology companies that are very disruptive. So if you think about Google, and you think about Apple, and you think about Tesla, those were technology-based disruption. But the vast majority of startups that were successful did not start off with any disruptive or new technology, right? So it's much more about understanding opportunities in the market and kind of quickly building a business around the customer, creating value for the customer, and thinking less about how am I going to extract or capture value from the customer. First, deliver value, and then once you deliver, then eventually you can think about the second stage, which is, okay, now that customers like us because we deliver value, how can we start monetizing this in another way? So the problem that I see with entrepreneurs is they want to solve too many problems at the same time. Day one, we have 50 different problems that we need to solve to have a fast-growing business. No. Focus on the first one, and then the second, and the third, and the fourth. Right? Uber started off just by having a website that you could call a black car, and you could see in a little map the car coming. It wasn't automated. It wasn't today. You automate the process. There's nobody involved in matching a passenger with a driver. But in the beginning, it was a manual process. Somebody needed to call a car and say, can you drive somebody to that place? This is amazing. People needed to realize that you can build phenomenal businesses without having all this technological infrastructure set in place on day one. Build it over time.
Okay. That is very helpful for our audience. Let me go back into a little bit of application of your theory and your findings from this past 2 decades. Is it the same, the working into a B2B and a B2C environment? Does the same principles apply? And if they do so, could you elaborate a little bit on the B2B side?
Sure. Most apply if you think of it from a point of view of a customer value chain. The customer value chain, you can still define all these activities that customers do. The way businesses buy products are much more standard than how consumers buy it, right? How did you buy a shirt? It's like a lot of things we don't know. But when you're, as a business, you're buying, you submit quotes, you have RFPs, you have a deliberate process for buying the vast majority of products. So that makes a B2B a more rational type of customer. And so that facilitates the method of looking at customer value chain, mapping out, discovering what activities value creating, value capturing, value eroding, and then figuring out how to decouple the process. So all that is similar. But I've come to learn by advising a few startups in the B2B sector that there's some different aspects about selling B2B, particularly when you're trying to sell B2B technology or something innovative, something new. The first is, if you look at companies buy things when they have budgets. If they have budget, they might consider buying something. But if there's no budget, it could be an amazing product. That's it. You're not going to sell, right? So you need to figure out a way to get into a budget. You're not getting into a company. You're getting into a budget, which means somebody owns a budget and has a bunch of lines, and there's some money allocated for something. If you cannot find, if you're offering a product, and you cannot find the line in the budget where that person can put in, that's it. They're done. They say, hey, man, I love your product, but there's no space in my budget. So you need to find space in the budget. Now, one trick, lots of startups, because they're startups, they want to be innovative. And so what they want to sell to another business is something that they say, hey, we have something very innovative. The problem is that companies don't buy innovative things as much as we think. Everybody talks about innovation, but let me tell you this. When you look at a budget of a company, a big or a small company, 99% of that budget is spent on things that they needed last year, and 98% are things that they needed 2 years ago, and 97% of things that they needed 5 years ago. Therefore, by definition, what the company is buying is not innovation. Innovation is 1%. So they have a little bit of money to buy something innovative. So the way you sell products to B2B is you can't say we have a very innovative product or service that nobody else has, because then they need to allocate it in that 1% of innovation budget, which is always very small. You need to figure out a way to enter or hack the budget of companies. And sometimes it might be by offering something very cheap for the innovation budget. And then once you're in there, you try to convince your clients to put you in a line item for next year such that you're part of the budget. So it's all about, it's a real estate game for getting access into the budget of these established companies. In the beginning, the way I advocate is you sell whatever you want to sell as a complement to what they have. Because you don't want to fight against an established player in the budget because you're a startup. You don't have something amazing. And they're going to say, well, you know, we use this software or we use this product all the time, and you have this something new. Is it better? Is it cheaper? Oftentimes it's not. So you go into the innovation budget, and then you learn to become better, and then you try to displace something that is in the budget by saying, now, after a few years and you've worked with us, you know, how about you renew with us for next year, and you offer them something that becomes more encompassing, a better product, a cheaper product than the alternative, or more efficient or something like that. So that's kind of the approach that I advocate for trying to sell into B2B.
Okay. And regarding you mentioned previously, Thales, that you need to understand, we need to understand very well the needs of our customers and where we could overperform to delight them. But then again, there's an atomization of the audiences. New generations, millennials, centennials, think differently than baby boomers. And by the same token, one might figure also that the baby boomers that are in retirement age are living longer and have different expectations than 30 or 40 years ago. Having said so, I think there's a huge landscape of opportunities for people that are willing to look very broadly to different audiences. And if that's so, what is your take? Have you come into conversations in your advising multiple companies in different territories about this fact of how to understand these new generations and the gray economy?
You're absolutely right. In some industries, the next generation of consumers is highly disruptive to the previous generation in terms of what they value. In some cases, not. One example that we identified is in insurance, life insurance, health insurance. The older people, the older generation, the way they bought insurance is they have a broker that has become their friend. And every time they have an insurance demand, they go to their broker and say, hey, Mauricio, it's me again. I now need life insurance. I now need insurance for my daughter. What do you have? It's good for me. We have a good relationship, and you're going to say, hey, come on in to my office. And I go there. We talk. You know everybody in my family, because you know all these details. We talk, have fun. And then you tell me, this is the best product for you. And this worked well for baby boomer generation and even maybe one after. But this has not been working for the younger generation. The younger generation, they do not want to talk to somebody to understand what are the options of insurance. They want to do it online. They don't want to go anywhere. They don't even want to call a broker up on the phone. They want, if they could, they would just get all the options of insurance in a table, the best, the worst, the pros and cons, which one is better and what, in a table, and say, these are the prices, these are the dimensions, which one do you want? They click, and that's the one they want. And so insurance companies are having a huge disruptive moment because they have hired a bunch of brokers, a sales force of brokers, and now the brokers are less and less efficient because they can't sell to the young generations. And the question is, what do you do with all these people? Do you fire them? Do you keep them? Do you have them? You still need to keep some of them for the older generations, for the new ones. So we've been working with these transition moments that makes it very hard, that you need one business model for one older group of customers and another business model for the young group of customers. And because now you have two business models, you end up having two inefficient businesses, so to speak. One that is dying and one that is growing but not yet mature. And now you have two overlapping businesses, which makes it the whole as much less efficient than if you were just one or just another. But there's no answer to that. This is just a reality of a big transition in the customer requirements and needs over time. But that's a big point.
Okay, great. Thales, one of in keynotes of Jeff Bezos, he mentioned that for him, it was very important, or the most important question was not what's going to change the next 5 or 10 years. It's what is not going to change the next 5 or 10 years, because you need to build a business around things that are not going to change. Yeah. If that is true, what would be your advice in the things that never change in business?
Well, as an academic, words that I never use is never and always.
Okay.
I tell my students, my PhD students, don't ever write a sentence that says always or never, because all you need is one counterexample to prove you're wrong. So don't ever do that, right? Somebody has a counterexample. So I'm not going to answer the never question, but unlikely to change. It's very unlikely to change in the next decade or so, right? That I can probably try, and I might be wrong, and most likely, but I would say one thing that wasn't the case when I was younger, that has changed, that I still think is here to stay for a while, is consumers' need for convenience. Much more today, consumers' requirement and need for convenience in every aspect of their lives has become something super big. And Jeff Bezos has built, a $1 trillion business around offering convenience. All of the products were sold before, but his business is a convenience-based business. Whatever you want, I'm going to make sure you get it in the most easy and fastest way possible. And kudos to him for doing it. But there's still other avenues that you can improve convenience, right? That we still have problems in traveling, in education. There's still a lot of untapped opportunities for figuring out business models that can add even more convenience to consumers. And I think that's kind of one aspect of that is unlikely to change in the foreseeable future. A few other ones that are unlikely to change is, the younger generation has a much deeper respect for conservation and nature and things like that, and so I think there's been a growing view of importance of recycling and environmental sustainability, and I think that's going to be for the long haul. Universities are creating schools of environmental and sustainable practices, and I think kind of that's something that is growing and will not change in the foreseeable future. But ultimately is understanding the value equation of people. What are people's value equation? I value, in clothing, I value differentiation, or I value plus convenience, plus this, plus that, plus it has to be recyclable material, all these things. Understanding the value equation of people, that's where entrepreneurs and executives need to be constantly thinking about it, because that is their basis for understanding market opportunities and where new businesses are going to come up.
Good. I've heard and read different authors, Thales, regarding the importance of trying to eliminate friction, reduce time, because probably those two elements are key in convenience. Nevertheless, even though that's saving time, the other aspect is time well spent.
Yeah.
So if I do spend time with the insurance company or its agent, it's worthwhile for me. Is there an area of disruption in how we feel people? How do we appreciate their business? How we treat them? Or is it always about convenience regarding time and frictionless activities?
So quite a few years ago, I remember the business community and startups were talking about frictionless commerce, frictionless this, frictionless banking, everything. You need to figure out everything that makes it harder for consumers to accomplish something, and you need to eliminate. And as an academic, it's always nice to see something that people are saying and you prove them wrong, right? And I decided, let me prove people wrong, that it's not true that frictionless is the best way to go. And I wrote an academic article and published it, and I still teach it in my courses. Basically, the idea is the following. Reducing friction is something desirable by consumers. We all want to reduce friction. The problem is that if you reduce friction, in certain examples, and I'll tell you later, you might actually reduce the ability for you to make money out of these people. So if you make, for example, there's a startup that created an insurance that you can turn on and off with your phone called Trove. And it's frictionless insurance. So if you have, we're traveling, if you have your laptop computer, you can turn on and off the insurance at any point in time that you want. Frictionless, very easy. You swipe to the right, swipe to the left, you turn on and off insurance. Instead of calling the insurance company and asking for it to turn on and off, you can do that. What was happening is people would turn on insurance when they were in high-risk situations and then turn off insurance when they were like in low-risk situations. And therefore, they would pay very little on a per-day basis, right? In e-commerce, if you make it frictionless, actually what happens is to give people the cheapest, most discounted items, people will actually buy products, but they'll buy only the ones that are discounted, and they won't buy full price items. So, and I've worked with companies to show, like, you can't just, for example, in your website, just put the products that are the highest discounted items in the front page. You have to make it harder for people to find the value items. And if you do that, only the people who really value the discounts will find it, and the people who don't value enough the discounted, they won't be bothered by trying to find it, and they'll pay full priced items. So you can increase how much money you make out of this. So be careful with frictionless. It's not the solution. It definitely helps consumers, but it might come at the expense of the entrepreneur.
I see. It might be counterproductive for the business model. You
Yeah.
might then making
Another
it
way.
easier for the customer, you should be losing
And
money.
then you
So,
lose money, and then you just lose money. Yeah, exactly. So that's it.
okay, basically your findings in California from visiting companies that operate in the technology sector. I know that your book is based on the disruption, and I would like to explore other areas. For example, leadership, culture. What things have you seen that makes these companies really succeed in the business environment?
Yeah. So kind of in the matters of kind of, first, I do not believe that established companies should operate and act like as if they were startups. They're not,
Okay.
right? Startups have a very unique incentive mechanism. People that go for startups, they take in investor money. They have a huge upside potential, huge risk. They're risk seekers. These are people that self-select to startups. They want to become extremely rich, very successful, and they have stock options and all of these things. And that makes them make certain decisions along of how to use their time, their day-to-day decisions for the business that are very different from what executives do. So I don't think, in an executive business, established business, you should kind of try to mimic a startup. You should learn how startups work and learn how to innovate as an established business. There's a few things that can be learned, right? In my experience, just the process of innovation in established companies is much, much slower. It involves many people. It involves many phases. It involves a lot of data. So when like a CEO, a senior executives hire innovators for the company, they want the innovators to come up with a lot of innovation, business model, or technology, or new products or something. But then the requirements are very high. They essentially tell the innovation person, say, "Oh, I hired you. Can you come up with a kind of new products or new services? And by the way, it can't cannibalize our other products. Just be aware of that. And can you come up with a 5-year plan? Things that in startups is like they just do a 5-month plan. Oh, by the way, we'll give you the budget if you start showing traction, which doesn't happen in the startup, right? The startup gets the money and then tries to get traction. And by the way, it has to be very different than our competitors. We want something innovative, different from the other. And then they tack on so much requirements that it becomes impossible to innovate in established companies. So the biggest barrier that I would say to innovation in established companies, from the leadership culture, the soft organizational structure aspect of it, is actually something much simpler. Is like, let people try with much smaller, lower barriers. If you put too many long, strong barriers, these are executives, they have salary. They're not going to be able to jump over all these barriers that you're putting on top of them to come up with something new. And so therefore your company will never have new things in the market to try out, right? So that's kind of one of the things. In another case, there are obviously companies that launch a lot of products and most of them fail. And the ones that launch too many products, they're often an engineering-led culture. Engineering comes up with products and then pushes to the rest of the company to try to sell it to the marketplace. No. Become more customer-driven. Get the data from what customers really want, and then go back to engineers saying, can you build something for this need? The product has to be a solution. Do a lot of more research on needs and problems and less immediately on solutions to start off the innovation process. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. There was I imagine you know her, Frances Frey from the Harvard Business School. She wrote a book on common service, and she mentions that the greatest challenge for businesses is to having to do trade-offs, because trying to be good at everything, it's basically impossible. You will fail miserably trying to be good at everything.
Yeah.
But having said so, there's open areas for in-commerce to attack your business, because you always will leave some links that are going to be fragile. What is your thoughts about it?
Yeah, no, I think, the nature of competition, the way I see it is one little company starts selling something to somebody and they like it. And they say, okay, what else can we sell it to this person? Can we sell other things to other people? Can we go to other markets? And they start growing and becoming a Walmart, selling pretty much everything to everybody. But in the process of growing and becoming big, as you say, you can't become terrifically, because there's trade-offs, right? When you're big and you have a huge a super center like Walmart that has, 80, 100,000 SKUs, it suddenly becomes a problem, because now as a consumer, I have to go to Walmart and I have to spend an hour and a half to buy a few items. So now it's not convenient, right? And so they left an opportunity for convenience, which smaller supermarkets like Trader Joe's in the US took advantage by making small stores that work for convenience. And eventually Amazon would say, hey, come, you don't need to go to spend an hour and a half in a Walmart to buy things, right? So this will always happen. And then Amazon and Trader Joe's, and then they grow. And in the process, they create the seeds for their own demise. Now, if you go to Amazon, if you put, I bought a ski mask for my son. Ski mask. There's 500 ski masks, and each one has 5,000 reviews. I don't know what to buy anymore. So now there's an opportunity, because now consumers don't know. It's too complicated to shop and find the best products. This has created an opportunity for a next disruptor. So this wave of disruption happens as companies grow. They do too much, and then they create a new problem for the consumer. And startups that are quick in identifying will create a new business, and then they will grow, will create another problem, and so on and so forth, by this method of trade-off and growth, and solve a customer problem, but at the same time create something new. And that's, to me, the cycle of business model innovation.
Wow. That is very helpful, Thales. Well, it has been a pleasure. I hope that we will see you very soon here in Colombia and in other Latin countries. I always like to end these conversations by asking if there's something else that you should be telling our audience that I missed in this conversation, that you think it's important for them to know, based on what you're doing currently right now in your academic world or in your business world, in your company?
No, I think we've touched upon one of the biggest topics is business model innovation. I think we've touched on that. And the key there is, if you're an innovator, don't think about innovating very big in the beginning. Think about it as steps in a ladder. Start small and grow over time as you get customers involved. So this process we touched on AI. AI is the big thing now. Generative AI has become very valuable. I see it as a huge transformation in business and in society. So anything that you can possibly do to keep up to date and keep learning about AI. I myself, if I stay more than a few days without trying a new AI tool, I already feel that I didn't do, it's like brushing your teeth now. You should think about it. You should do at least one activity per day using an AI tool to make sure you have your AI hygiene in place. And then the third one is really Latin America, right? Latin America is becoming really an opportunity for growth. Happy and Nubank and many other, and Mercado Libre. Wow, these businesses have grown, and there's a Latin America tech company flavor that is growing, and you should learn about that. And this is going to be a superpower that Latin Americans entrepreneurs in the digital startup and tech space will be able to show to the world that is not a US way to build amazing, terrific businesses, and not a China way. I think there's a third way, and that's the Latin American way that we're starting to see.
Wow. Thank you so much. Well, Thales, it's been great for me and for the audience. I hope to see you soon. And again, 2025 will be the year that you come here to Colombia and Peru and other countries.
Absolutely. Guaranteed, Mauricio. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking and discussing with you this and other topics face-to-face in 2025.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Gracias por habernos acompañado hasta el final de este episodio. Quiero invitarlos para el siguiente, la próxima semana, que estará fenomenal. Finalmente, por favor, suscríbete a nuestro canal. Gracias.